All right, it's the middle of the week. It's Wednesday, and this is the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Get your day started right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You get your morning shave, you get your morning shower, and you get your morning Pitt, where we're talking about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports every day of the week, Monday through Friday, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We have these daily videos that we put out, and you don't want to miss any of it, so make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video while you're at it, and then, of course, head over and check out Panther-Lair.com. That's the website, the main site, the mothership, the homepage, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, as I always say, and I think this is a big part of the appeal, I mean, to be quite honest, I think we write great articles. I think people really like the content we put out, and the news and all that stuff. But a lot of people come for the message boards, and there's a lot of overlap there. The articles get posted on the message boards, get linked on the message boards. People read the content, and then they go to the message boards and talk about it. And anything you see around the internet, any kind of Pitt relevant news, people check it out and then go talk about it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And a lot to talk about there. People have been talking about a lot of things there. I don't know why I have that. I wanted to put up a basketball slideshow on the show this morning because we were going to talk about some basketball topics. And I just happened to pick the slideshow from the Xavier game. And there's that picture of Sean Miller. But he's a Pitt guy, right? I mean, former Pitt player. So we'll leave it in there. I should have picked I might have a different slideshow I can put in. Nope, not that one. Nope. Let me see. There we go. Let's try this. We'll try a different basketball slideshow. Nice picture of Jamarius Burton there. You're seeing the magic happen behind the screens right here, folks. But basketball topics to discuss because Noah Thomason, the transfer guard from Niagara, who was a top Pitt target. I mean, maybe the top priority target after the guys they've already landed and sort of where the staff stands right now, committed to Georgia yesterday. Thomason had been at Pitt over the weekend for an official visit, so clearly the interest was sincere and significant on both sides, I would say. Pitt was very interested in adding Thomason to the mix. Thomason was interested enough in Pitt to take the visit, but even during the weekend, there were rumors that Georgia was the favorite. I think even, going into the weekend, there was an expectation that Georgia was the favorite. Mid-weekend, that nothing seemed to have changed with that expectation, and now a couple of days later, on Tuesday, as a matter of fact, he ends up making the commitment to Georgia. So that one's off the board. Pitt still sitting. I said stitting, not the other mispronunciation of sitting. Pitt's still sitting with 2 open scholarship spots. And, of course, we'll talk about what they're going to do there. I'll say this right off the bat. Noah Thomason, I think, is a really good player. He put up a really good stat line at Niagara. He scored a lot. He shot really well. He would have been a great fit with this team and kind of how they're already constructed and what the roster looks like for next season. He would have been a really good fit. You can understand why the Pitt coaches were drawn to him, why they were attracted to the Niagara transfer. And you can understand why Georgia was drawn to him and the other programs that he was considering. You can understand it. It makes sense. And so he's the type of player who would fit in well with just about anybody, just about any roster that he would join. And certainly he would fit in well with Pitt's. And I don't want to go, I'm not going to minimize it, right? I'm not going to minimize the impact of missing out on this kid or minimize what he could have done for this roster. But I do feel like, and I think the Pitt coaches probably feel this way too, that they're in a little bit of a luxury zone right now in terms of pursuing additional transfer portal targets. They don't need anything right now. They might want things. They might want players. They might want to add certain types of players, but they don't necessarily need anything. They have 11 scholarship players, and you certainly don't want to go into the season with only 11 scholarships. There's no benefit for going into the season holding back on a few scholarship spots. They intended to enter last year with 13 scholarships, if you recall, all full. Cassius McNeely at the last minute, really, late in the summer, ended up pulling out due to some personal reasons. So they went into the year with 12 scholarships. That's why they were able to put Aiden Fish on scholarship at mid-year like they did. But the intention was to go in with 13, and I think the intention this year is to go in with 13 as well, because you never know what might happen. So, I mean, they intended to go in with 13 last year, and then Cassius McNeely left, right? Will Jeffress got hurt. Dior Johnson got in trouble. John Hughley left. Now, 13 becomes 9. You know, you go from 13 to 9 rather quickly, you know, just in the span of a few months before you're even really halfway through the season. And just that quickly, you're down to, you know, never mind trying to go 10 deep in your rotation. You don't even have 10 guys you can use in your rotation. And that's still, you know, one of your 9 is Nate Santos, who doesn't really play very much. So that's why they end up being as sort of short as they were last year in terms of the numbers. So there's no advantage to going into the year with only 11 scholarship spots filled. You're allowed to have 13. You should use all 13. And I think the coaching staff intends to. That being said, they have more or less filled out a 9-man rotation at a minimum, and really they could, if Will Jeffress is healthy, they can walk on the court right now and go 2 deep at every spot. They can have a 10-man rotation. They can dig that deep into the bench, and it's not really that hard to imagine. And so that puts them in a spot where they're not recruiting transfers to fill out the rotation anymore, to fill out the starting lineup. They're not sitting here with, oh no, we don't have a 5 or something like that. Oh no, we don't have a point guard. I think they feel comfortable with, you know, going into the season with Dior Johnson and Jalen Lowe as the point guards. And I know there's a little bit of anxiety that can be induced by that statement, considering they're 2 guys who have never played basketball in college before, but they're very good players. All right. And we've seen this staff be willing to rely on freshmen before, for better or for worse. And I think when it was for worse, it wasn't necessarily due to a talent issue. That's probably it. We could probably do a whole Morning Pitt episode on that situation. But I think they feel like they've got their point guards. You know, with Ishmael Leggett, the transfer from Rhode Island, and Carlton Carrington, the freshman, I think they feel like they've got their 2 guards. With Zach Austin, the transfer from High Point, and then, you know, take your pick, either William Jeffress, you know, assuming he's healthy for this season, which I think the expectation is he will be, or Marlon Barnes, the freshman coming in, they feel like they've got their 3s, their small forwards. With Blake Hinson, assuming he comes back, and, you know, Jorge Diaz-Graham, I think they feel like they've got their 4s. You know, and with Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, they feel like they've got their 5s. Now, I guess you could look at it and say, yeah, but that means they're only 2 deep at every spot. You need to have even more depth piled up behind those guys, because you never know what can happen. And that's true. I mean, they ended up in a situation last year where Federico, not even... It wasn't even Federico. It was because after he got hurt, you had Guillermo Diaz-Graham playing significant minutes in the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament as, you know, your primary center at times due to Federico's injury. And, you know, this is coming from a situation where in November, you thought Federico would be a low minute sub for John Hughley. So the situation can always change pretty drastically. You'd like to think right now, as we sit here on May 10th, that you have a pretty clear idea of what it's going to look like. You know, that you're not going to have a Cassius McNeely, that you're not going to have a Dior Johnson. You're going to have a Dior Johnson, but not a Dior Johnson situation where a guy gets in trouble in October and ends up missing the entire season. You know, you'd like to sit here on May 10th and think, you know, you're not going to have a John Hughley situation where the guy takes off at midseason. You'd like to think you're not going to have any of those, and maybe you won't have any of those situations. You won't have a guy leave for personal reasons right before the start of the fall semester. You won't have a guy get in trouble with the law in October. You won't have a guy bail on the team in January. You won't have a guy get hurt and miss the entire season. You'd like to think you won't have those situations, but you can't rule out the possibility that something might happen. Even if it's not those exact situations, some kind of situation might arise that tests your depth. That was a really long way of saying I think they're going to fill these last 2 scholarship spots. But it was, I do, you know, it does kind of wind around to the feeling that this is sort of looking for luxury. Now, Noah Thomason would have been a great luxury ad. And he wouldn't have just been sort of a fringe player. He probably would have stepped into the starting lineup. I think, you know, Ishmael Leggett is perfectly capable of being a starter at the 2. I think he's perfectly capable of playing a lot of minutes for this team, and I think he's perfectly capable of being a good player for this team. I think he can bring a lot and add a lot. I think the coaches feel like he can shoot better than he did. When he's not being relied on to score all the points like he was at Rhode Island. And plus, and we've talked about this before, I think he can bring a lot in terms of rebounding from that position, which Pitt really didn't have last year. I think they'll get much better rebounding out of, the entire backcourt and really the perimeter as a whole with Zach Austin, just with the additions of Zach Austin and Ishmael Leggett. So Leggett, I think, is perfectly capable of starting, but if you can find another player at that position, a good shooter, which is, I think, what they were trying, a shooter and a scorer, which I think is what they were trying to get with Noah Thomason, then I think Leggett very much, I think he can come off the bench as well. I don't know what the conversations were between the Pitt coaches and Ish Leggett, and if they said, well, you might start, you might come off the bench, but there are going to be lots of minutes to go around. And so they've got their starters if they want. If this is how it goes and the last 2 spots are just filled with depth guys, that's okay. Because you can start Dior Johnson, Ishmael Leggett, Zach Austin, Blake Hinson, Federico. And we're going to, as we move through here, we're going to operate on the assumption that Blake Hinson is coming back. He's testing the draft process, getting feedback. I think we're assuming he's going to come back. I think Pitt is assuming he's going to come back. I think it's a safe assumption that he'll be back. And if he is, you've got your starting 5. Barring weird things happening, you've got your starting 5. And then you've got some pretty good depth pieces. I think Lowe and Carrington are absolutely going to be counted on to play significant roles this season, and I think they're up to the task. I think the Pitt coaches feel like they both can be good shooters. I think they feel like Jalen Lowe both guys are sort of low-key studs in the waiting, and in the making, I guess might be a better way of saying it. And it's college basketball. Having freshmen contribute and play at a high level is not unexpected, and in some respects, it's counted on. I don't think it's the worst thing if Pitt goes into this season counting on Dior Johnson, Jalen Lowe, and Carlton Carrington to play significant minutes and even start. I don't think it's crazy to think that you'll see Johnson, Lowe, and Carrington on the court together, or Johnson, Leggett, and Carrington, or Lowe, Leggett, and Carrington all sort of playing together if they go to a 3-guard look. If Zach Austin slides down and maybe plays power forward for a little bit, if they have to change their lineups or go a little bit smaller, I don't think it'll be crazy at all, and I don't think the Pitt coaches are really worried about that. They had such a unique situation last year getting Nelly Cummings in as a 6th-year senior guard, a guy who has been in college basketball for a really long time and was able to come in and provide that presence. This year's not going to look like that. We've talked a lot of times about how this year's team, this coming season's team, is going to be very different from last year's team. It's going to be built differently. It's going to operate differently. They're not going to have, now, they've got 2 scholarship spots left, so I don't want to say it definitively, but as of right now, they don't have another Greg Elliott, right? I'm not really sure that they have a Jamarius Burton, although I think Carlton Carrington kind of fancies himself as one. They don't necessarily have a Greg Elliott, but what they do have is, Hinson, Austin, Leggett, and the freshmen. They have a lot of guys who can shoot. I wouldn't be surprised if the Diaz-Graham twins shoot better and shoot more than they did last year, just after having a year of getting comfortable on the court in college basketball. I think they'll get, I think there's 2 areas that are going to, this team could potentially be, well, let's talk about each area independently. I think rebounding this team can be better and more productive and more effective on the glass through a group effort of Federico, Blake Hinson, the Diaz-Graham twins, Austin Leggett. I think he can be, and even Will Jeffers, I think can get involved in that as well. I think they can be better rebounding than they were a year ago through more of a group effort. They might not have a guy who averages a double-double, but they'll get a lot of guys I think can average 4 to 6 to 7 to boost the overall team production of rebounds. And then with 3-point shooting, as opposed to it being, it wasn't just Greg Elliott and Blake Hinson last year. Nelly Cummings and Nike Savandi made a bunch of threes as well. But I think you'll have sort of a real group effort of Blake Hinson leading the way again shooting from outside, but also Zach Austin making shots from outside, Ishmael Leggett making shots from outside, and the freshman, maybe even Dior Johnson. I think we're expecting him to be more of a point guard and a slasher and trying to get to the hoop, but I'm sure he can knock down a shot from outside as well. And you've got the Diaz-Graham twins who have that in their skill set. They have that ability to shoot from outside. And so I think this team can maybe match the three-point production from a year ago, but do it more with even more guys contributing than they had last year. Where last year you had Blake Hinson and Greg Elliott just leading the charge, and then, Cummings and Sabandi after that, and everyone else, and that was kind of it. This year, I think you could get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even as many as 7 guys presenting a real threat to knock down shots from outside. It's going to be a very different team than it was last year. I think there's some things that were learned about style of play and approach last season that the coaches will probably try to carry over, but it's going to be a different team. Particularly when you look at the transfers that they brought in of Ishmael Leggett and Zach Austin, as opposed to guys like Greg Elliott, Blake Hinson. I mean, Hinson's still here, but Nelly Cummings. Those were different transfers than what they've got this year. So what do they need for these last 2 spots? These, if we want to call them sort of luxury spots, I think the effort continues to be finding a shooter, because as I say, I think this team can put up good production from the 3-point line through more of a group effort than they did last year. But if you can get another guy who's a really good shooter, who can really knock down shots from outside, then obviously you take it. It's going to make you better, and it's going to draw more attention away from the post and maybe help establish more of an interior game than they had a year ago, which I think they will have just by virtue of Federico, and Guillermo Diaz-Graham improving year to year, being a year older and that much more experienced. So I would say with these last 2 spots, one should be a shooter, and then the other, take your pick. Whatever you really want to go get them. If you can get a big, if you can get a high school kid, a JUCO, whatever it is. You're really talking about scholarship spot number 13 here for a roster that is pretty well stocked right now. And again, they shouldn't go into the season with empty scholarship spots, but you don't want to take guys just to take them. But again, they're not working from a position of need here. It's more sort of what can they add on top of what they've already got. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. They've already been contacting guys, particularly in the wake of Noah Thomason going to Georgia. And it's always an ongoing process. Guys are getting contacted all the time, and Pitt is no different. They are reaching out to guys all over the transfer portal, and we'll see what comes of it. What they're able to get as far as visits, and ultimately what transfers they are able to land. We'll talk about that a lot more tonight on the live Panther-Lair show. It's Wednesday. It's tonight, 8:30 p.m. Every Wednesday night, we have the live Panther-Lair show. We're going to be joined again by Jim Hammett from Panther-Lair.com. I'm excited to have Jim back. We had a lot of fun last week talking with Jim about all the Pitt topics. This week, we'll talk with Jim again, and probably do it every week if he's willing to put up with us. But it was a lot of fun doing that. So Jim and I will talk about this basketball situation. We'll talk about some football recruiting stuff. We'll talk about over-under wins. We'll talk about Heather Likes hires. All the things we're talking about on the Morning Pitt, we'll bring up tonight on the live show. So make sure you tune in tonight, 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you don't mind. I would appreciate that greatly. Like button's over there somewhere. That's YouTube's little thumbs up hand. Subscribe button's right down there in the yellow.com. The little yellow.com rectangle, there's a subscribe button. So click that, and then you can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live or every time we post a new video here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, check out the main page, the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Thanks so much for tuning in this morning. We appreciate it. And make sure you come back tonight at 8:30 p.m. for the live Panther-Lair show. And then we'll be back with you again tomorrow morning for another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.